The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, unmarked and impossibly heavy. Marcus Hale stared at the corporate logo embossed in gold, the same symbol that had appeared on his wife's death certificate 2 years ago. Inside, a cashier's check for $2 million and a single typed line, "For your silence." His hands trembled. The girl in his spare room hummed softly down the hall, making breakfast for his daughter. She'd been living there for 3 months now, kind, gentle, perfect, too perfect. And somehow, impossibly, she was connected to this. The check slipped from his fingers as the truth began to crystallize. He'd let the enemy into his home. Before we dive into this story, I want to invite you to stick with me until the very end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about justice, family, and the price of truth. If this story touches you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin. Marcus Hale learned about rock bottom the same way most people learn about gravity, by falling until there was nothing left beneath him but concrete. It happened on a Tuesday in March, the kind of gray morning where the sky hung low and heavy like a bruise that wouldn't heal. He'd been sitting in the break room of Northridge Manufacturing, eating a sandwich that tasted like cardboard and regret, when Jerry from HR appeared in the doorway with that particular expression, the one that said, "Your life was about to get smaller." "Marcus, can you come with me?" 23 minutes later, he was standing in the parking lot with a cardboard box containing a coffee mug his daughter had decorated, 3 years of performance reviews that didn't matter anymore, and a severance package that wouldn't last through summer. The official reason was restructuring. The real reason was that Northridge had been acquired by Meridian Holdings 6 months earlier, and Meridian didn't give a damn about loyalty or seniority or the fact that Marcus had worked double shifts when his wife Emma was sick, burning through vacation days and personal time until there was nothing left but the job itself. And now, he didn't even have that. The apartment felt different when you came home in the middle of the day. Wrong, somehow. Like walking into a movie theater after the film has started and everyone's already settled into the story, except you. Marcus set the box on the kitchen counter and looked around at the cramped two-bedroom that had once felt cozy and now just felt small. Dishes in the sink, Sophie's backpack dumped by the door, Emma's reading glasses still on the side table where she'd left them 2 years ago because moving them felt like erasing her completely. "Daddy?" Sophie stood in her bedroom doorway, homesick from school with what the nurse had called a mild fever. But what Marcus suspected was actually exhaustion. His daughter was 7 years old and already carried shadows under her eyes that no child should know. "Hey, baby girl," he manufactured a smile. "Feeling better?" "You're home early." Kids noticed everything. It was one of the superpowers they developed when the world stopped making sense, a hyper-awareness of changes in routine, shifts in tone, the particular way adults rearranged their faces when they were lying about everything being okay. "Yeah, they gave me the afternoon off." Sophie studied him with those eyes, Emma's eyes, dark and intelligent and far too perceptive. Then she nodded, accepting the lie because what else could a 7-year-old do? She patted over and hugged him around the waist, her small arms surprisingly strong. "It's okay, Daddy. We'll be okay." And that, Marcus thought as he held his daughter in their shabby kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, was the moment he understood that childhood was supposed to protect you from having to say things like that. The math was brutal and simple. Severance, $4,200. Rent, $1,450. Utilities, $200. Food, $400 if they were careful. Sophie's after-school program, $175. Health insurance, $380 through Cobra, which would expire in 18 months anyway. Car payment, $265. Student loans, $320 because he'd believed the lie that education was an investment that paid dividends. He made the numbers work. Then he made them work again. Then he opened a beer he couldn't afford and made them work a third time with the same result. By June, they'd be drowning. Emma's life insurance had covered the funeral and 6 months of bills before it vanished like morning fog. There was no family money, no safety net, no rich uncle waiting in the wings. Marcus's parents were gone. Emma's mother was in a nursing home in Florida, her mind already halfway to somewhere else. Friends had been sympathetic after the funeral, but sympathy had a shelf life, and most people's expired around the same time the casseroles stopped coming. He could find another job, obviously. He'd already sent out 37 applications, tailoring each resume, crafting earnest cover letters that radiated competence and enthusiasm. So far, 4 rejections and 33 silences. The economy was recovering, according to news anchors with perfect teeth, but recovery was a relative term. For people like Marcus, mid-40s, manufacturing background, no college degree, recovery looked a lot like a mirage. He needed something now. Not next month. Not after interviews and background checks and the slow-grinding wheels of corporate HR. Now. That's when he remembered the spare room. It had been Emma's office back when she was getting her real estate license. Before the headaches started. Before the diagnosis that came too late, and the treatments that cost everything and bought them 6 extra months that were somehow both precious and devastating. After she died, Marcus had closed the door and pretended the room didn't exist. But it did exist. 120 square feet of unused space in an apartment where space was expensive. He could rent it out. The idea felt wrong at first, like betraying Emma's memory. But then he looked at the numbers again, and the numbers didn't care about sentiment. The numbers just sat there, implacable and honest. Without extra income, they were finished. He posted the listing that night. Small furnished room and quiet apartment. $600 per month plus utilities. Kitchen and bathroom shared. No smoking, no pets. Prefer quiet tenant. Background check required. The responses started coming within hours. A grad student who sent a 3-paragraph essay about his research. A woman who asked if she could pay in cash and seemed disappointed when Marcus said he'd need official documentation. A guy named Trevor who showed up for the viewing smelling like weed and opportunity, neither of which Marcus was interested in. Then, on a Friday evening while Sophie was at a friend's house, the doorbell rang and Marcus opened it to find a young woman with a messenger bag and the kind of calm expression that suggested she'd already decided she was taking the room. "Hi," she said. "I'm Lena. I emailed about the room?" She was younger than he'd expected, early 20s maybe, college age. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, minimal makeup, wearing jeans and a sweater that looked expensive in that way, where quality announced itself quietly. She had an interesting face, not conventionally pretty, but striking. The kind of face that made you wonder what she was thinking. "Right," Marcus said, suddenly aware of the coffee stain on his shirt. "Come in." She stepped inside and looked around with the focused attention of someone conducting an inspection. Not judging, exactly. Just cataloging. Her gaze moved across the modest furniture, the stack of unpaid bills Marcus had forgotten to hide, Sophie's drawings taped to the refrigerator, the crack in the living room ceiling that the landlord kept promising to fix. "It's nice," she said, and somehow didn't sound like she was lying. Marcus showed her the room. It was small but clean, with a twin bed, a desk, a narrow closet, and a window that looked out at the apartment building across the alley. Not much, but honest about what it was. Lena walked to the window and stood there for a moment quiet. "It's perfect," she said finally. "You haven't even asked about the lease terms." She turned, and there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something Marcus couldn't quite name. Determination, maybe. Or relief. "I need a place to stay that's quiet, private, somewhere I can think." She paused. "I can pay 6 months up front, cash, if that works for you." Marcus blinked. 6 months. That was $3,600. That was breathing room. That was the difference between surviving and drowning. "You're a student?" he asked, because the question felt safer than accepting immediately. "Was. I'm taking some time off to figure things out." "Working?" "Freelance work, online stuff, flexible hours." It was vague enough to be suspicious, but Marcus found himself not caring. She seemed clean, polite, calm. And she was offering cash, which meant no background check, no references, no paper trail that might slow things down when he needed fast. "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 7. This isn't exactly a party house." "Good. I'm not exactly a party person." "Kitchen and bathroom are shared. House rules are basic. Clean up after yourself, no guests without permission, quiet after 10. Sounds reasonable. Marcus studied her. There was something almost unsettling about how composed she was. Most people moving into a stranger's apartment asked more questions, showed more hesitation. Lena acted like she'd already made every calculation and arrived at a conclusion. "You're not running from something, are you?" he asked, half joking but not entirely. She smiled, and it was the first real emotion he'd seen from her, sad around the edges. "Aren't we all running from something?" "Fair point. When do you want to move in?" "Tomorrow." Lena arrived on Saturday morning with 3 suitcases, a laptop bag, and absolutely no furniture. Marcus helped her carry everything up, and she unpacked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Everything had a place. Everything was organized. Within an hour, the room looked lived in but not cluttered, personal but not revealing. Sophie watched from the doorway with the wide-eyed curiosity of a child encountering something new in her carefully controlled world. "Are you going to live here?" she asked. Lena crouched down to Sophie's level, which Marcus noticed and appreciated. Adults who talked to kids like small people instead of incomplete humans were rare. "For a while, yeah. Is that okay with you?" Sophie considered this seriously. "Do you like pancakes?" "Love them." "Good. Daddy makes pancakes on Sundays, but they're always kind of weird." "Hey," Marcus protested, but he was smiling. Lena grinned. "Maybe I can help. I make pretty good pancakes." And just like that, Sophie decided Lena was acceptable. That first week passed in a blur of adjustment. Lena was exactly what she'd promised: quiet, clean, respectful of boundaries. She worked on her laptop at odd hours, sometimes late into the night. She paid her rent on time. She was friendly without being intrusive, helpful without being overbearing. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the apartment started to change. It started with small things. Marcus would come home from job interviews that went nowhere and find the dishes already done. Sophie would mention that Lena had helped her with her math homework, and suddenly, fractions made sense. The refrigerator, which usually contained whatever Marcus could afford at the discount grocery store, started accumulating fresh vegetables and real cheese, and the kind of bread that didn't come pre-sliced in plastic. "You don't have to do that," Marcus said one evening, finding Lena in the kitchen cooking something that actually smelled good. "Do what?" "Buy food. Help with Sophie. You're paying rent, not—" "I like cooking," Lena interrupted gently. "And Sophie's sweet. If it bothers you, I'll stop." It didn't bother him. That was the problem. It felt too good, too easy. Too much like having another adult in the house who actually gave a damn. He'd been alone with Sophie for 2 years, carrying everything by himself. And suddenly there was someone else picking up the slack without being asked. It felt like cheating, or charity, or maybe just human kindness, which Marcus had started to think was extinct. "It doesn't bother me," he admitted. I don't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated. I feel grateful." She said it simply, like it was obvious. Like renting a room in a stranger's shabby apartment was something to be grateful for. Marcus wanted to ask what she was running from that made this place feel like sanctuary, but he didn't. Everyone was entitled to their secrets. By the 3rd week, it started to feel normal. Lena was just part of the routine, eating breakfast with them, asking Sophie about school, occasionally joining them for movies on the couch. She laughed at Sophie's jokes. She listened when Marcus complained about the job search. She existed in their space without demanding anything in return. For the first time since Emma died, the apartment didn't feel like a mausoleum. It felt like a home. Marcus should have known better. He'd learned the hard way that when things felt too good to be true, it was because they were. Wow. The first real crack appeared on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus was in the living room wrestling with a laptop that kept freezing, his own, a 6-year-old dinosaur that wheezed through basic tasks, when Lena emerged from her room looking frustrated. "My laptop died," she announced. "Just completely bricked. I have a project due, and I'm going to lose everything if I can't access my files." "Did you try?" "I tried everything. It's dead. Marcus looked at his own computer with its spinning wheel of doom. "Mine's not much better, but you can use it if you want. Fair warning, it's slow." "Slow is better than nothing." She took over the laptop and Marcus went to start dinner. He was halfway through chopping an onion when he heard her voice from the living room, sharp with surprise. "Marcus?" Why do you have files about Meridian Holdings on your computer? He froze. He'd forgotten about that. After the layoff, he'd gone down a rabbit hole searching for information about the company that had acquired Northridge. Not for any particular reason, just anger, mostly. Wanting to understand who had casually destroyed his livelihood. He downloaded some news articles, financial reports, whatever he could find. Just research, he called back, keeping his voice casual. After they laid me off, I wanted to know who they were. Silence from the living room. Then Lena appeared in the kitchen doorway, and her expression had changed. The casual friendliness was gone, replaced by something harder, calculating. Meridian Holdings, she repeated. You worked for them? Worked for a company they acquired. They cleaned house after the merger. I was part of the cleaning. What did you do there? Quality control, manufacturing, nothing glamorous. He set down the knife. Why? Lena's jaw tightened. For a moment, she looked like she was going to say something important. Then the moment passed and she shook her head. No reason, just surprised, that's all. But she was lying. Marcus could tell. The same way he could tell when Sophie was hiding something, or when HR Jerry was about to deliver bad news. Lena knew something about Meridian, and whatever it was had just made him interesting to her in a way he hadn't been before. She went back to her room shortly after, claiming a headache. She didn't join them for dinner. And when Marcus passed her door later that night, he heard her on the phone, voice low and urgent, speaking in a language he didn't recognize. The next morning, she was back to normal, cheerful, helpful, making pancakes for Sophie like nothing had happened. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. A curtain had been pulled back just far enough for him to glimpse something underneath, and then slammed shut before he could process what he'd seen. He told himself he was being paranoid. She was a tenant, not a spy. So what if she was curious about his former employer? So what if she made mysterious phone calls? Everyone was entitled to their privacy. But the feeling lingered. It was Mrs. Chen from 3B who planted the first real seed of doubt. Marcus ran into her in the laundry room on a Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Chen had lived in the building for 20 years and knew everyone's business with the thoroughness of a career intelligence analyst. I see you have a new roommate, she said, folding towels with military precision. Yeah, Lena. She's renting the spare room. Pretty girl. I guess. Mrs. Chen gave him a look that suggested she'd heard about every terrible decision he'd made and several he hadn't thought of yet. You run a background check? She paid 6 months cash up front. Seemed like a good deal. Mrs. Chen returned to her towels, but her disapproval radiated like heat. My nephew's girlfriend's sister works at that fancy hotel downtown, the Meridian Grand. Marcus's hand stilled on the dryer door. Okay. She says there was a girl staying there last month, young, your roommate's age, paying cash for a suite that cost $800 a night. Caused a big fuss when she checked out early, left the room trashed. So she showed me a picture from the hotel's social media, some charity event they hosted. You want to guess who was in the background? Marcus didn't want to guess. He wanted Mrs. Chen to mind her own business and let him do laundry in peace. But she was already pulling out her phone, swiping through photos with the determination of someone proving a point. Here. The photo was grainy, taken from across a ballroom filled with people in evening wear. But there, in the background near a pillar, was a figure that looked unmistakably like Lena. Same dark hair, same serious expression, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Marcus's car. Could be anyone, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Could be, Mrs. Chen agreed. Or could be your cash-paying tenant has some secrets. Just thought you should know. You've got that little girl to think about. She gathered her laundry and left, and Marcus stood there staring at the photo on her phone screen until it went dark. He didn't confront Lena. Not yet. Instead, he started paying attention. The bracelet, for instance. She wore it constantly, a delicate gold chain with a small charm he couldn't quite make out. The kind of jewelry that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. He'd noticed it before but hadn't thought much about it. Now he found himself wondering what kind of freelancer could afford something like that. The rent payments, too. She always paid in cash, crisp $100 bills that looked like they'd come straight from a bank. Never asked for a receipt, never tried to negotiate, just handed over the money like it was nothing. and her laptop, the one that had died. Marcus happened to walk past her open door one evening and saw her working on it. The supposedly bricked computer was functioning perfectly, displaying what looked like complex spreadsheets and documents covered in text he couldn't read from the doorway. She'd lied about it breaking, which meant she'd wanted access to his computer, which meant she'd been looking for something, the Meridian files. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't paranoia. Something was actually wrong here. He started spending more time at the library, using their computers to dig deeper into Meridian Holdings. What he found was a corporate labyrinth, shell companies, subsidiaries, international holdings. Meridian had its fingers in everything: manufacturing, real estate, pharmaceuticals, infrastructure development. One article caught his attention. It was from 3 years ago, a small piece in a regional newspaper about a town called Ashford, 2 hours north. The town's water supply had been contaminated with industrial chemicals. Dozens of people had gotten sick. 3 had died. The investigation had pointed to a Meridian subsidiary's improper disposal of manufacturing waste, but the case had been settled out of court with all parties signing NDAs. 3 people dead because a corporation had decided that proper waste disposal was too expensive. Marcus thought about Emma, about the headaches that had started 2 years before her diagnosis, about how many times she'd complained about the water tasting funny, how they'd laughed about the city's aging pipes and made jokes about buying filters they couldn't afford. He thought about the timeline. Meridian had acquired the water treatment facility in their area 18 months before Emma got sick. There'd been complaints about water quality, notices that got ignored, and then Emma had started having headaches, and then came the diagnosis, and then she was gone. It was probably nothing. Coincidence. Grief looking for something to blame besides random cellular mutation and bad luck. But what if it wasn't? Marcus went down the rabbit hole. He found more articles, more incidents. A pattern of Meridian subsidiaries cutting corners, violating regulations, paying fines that were small enough to be considered business expenses. He found lawsuits that had been settled, whistleblowers who'd been silenced, investigators who'd been stonewalled. And he found a name that appeared over and over: Richard Castellane, CEO of Meridian Holdings, billionaire, philanthropist, untouchable. There was a photo of him at some charity gala, shaking hands with politicians and smiling like a man who'd never worried about anything in his life. Next to him stood a young woman in an elegant dress, identified in the caption as his daughter. Marcus enlarged the photo. His hands started shaking. The daughter was Lena. He sat in the library until closing, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Richard Castellane's daughter was living in his apartment, sleeping in Emma's old office, making pancakes for his daughter. She'd shown up out of nowhere, paid cash, insinuated herself into their lives with surgical precision. Why? The obvious answer was that she knew something, that she'd somehow found out Marcus had worked for a Meridian subsidiary, that she was there to watch him, make sure he didn't cause trouble, didn't start asking dangerous questions about his wife's death. But that didn't make sense. If Meridian wanted to keep tabs on him, they wouldn't send the CEO's daughter. They'd send lawyers, investigators, people who knew what they were doing. Unless Lena wasn't there on Meridian's behalf. Unless she was running from them. Marcus remembered the urgency in her voice when she'd said she needed somewhere quiet to think. The way she'd reacted when she saw the Meridian files on his computer. Not suspicious, but shocked. Concerned. Like she knew something he didn't. What if she wasn't the enemy? What if she was a victim too? The library lights started flashing, the signal that closing time was approaching. Marcus saved his research to a flash drive and headed home, his mind spinning with questions he didn't know how to ask. When he got back to the apartment, Lena was on the couch with Sophie, watching some animated movie. They looked up when he entered, and the casual domesticity of the scene made his chest hurt. "Hey," Lena said, "there's leftover pasta in the fridge if you're hungry." "Thanks." He paused. "Can we talk after Sophie goes to bed?" Something flickered in her eyes. "Sure." He waited until Sophie was asleep, tucked in with her stuffed rabbit and a nightlight that cast gentle shadows. Then he went to the living room where Lena was waiting, sitting on the couch with her hands folded in her lap like a student expecting detention. "I know who you are. Marcus said quietly. She didn't flinch, didn't deny it, just nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting this. How long have you known? Couple days? I saw a photo. You're Richard Castellane's daughter. Yes. So what the hell are you doing here? Lena took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, but edged with something that might have been fear. I'm trying to fix something terrible, and I needed a place to hide while I figured out how. Hide from who? Your father? From everyone. She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. You asked me once if I was running from something. The answer is yes. I'm running from a truth that could destroy my father's empire. And if he finds out what I know, if he realizes what I'm planning to do, what are you planning to do? Lena stood and walked to her room. She returned a moment later with a small external hard drive, the kind that could hold terabytes of data. My father's company has been poisoning people for years, she said, cutting corners, falsifying reports, bribing inspectors. They contaminated water supplies in at least 7 cities to force property devaluation so they could buy land cheap and develop it. People died, including... She paused. I found records. One of those cities was here, 2 years ago. The room tilted. Marcus gripped the arm of the couch to steady himself. Emma, he whispered. I don't know specifics. I don't have names of victims, but the timeline matches. The chemical signature matches. If your wife got sick 2 years ago, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Marcus felt something crack open inside him. Grief and rage and a terrible crystallizing clarity. Emma hadn't just gotten unlucky. She'd been murdered. Slowly, systemically, by a corporation that had decided her life was worth less than a profit margin. Why? His voice came out raw. Why are you telling me this? Because I need help, Lena said simply. I have evidence. Documents, emails, internal memos, enough to prove everything. But I can't just release it. My father has lawyers, fixers, people who make problems disappear. If I go public without protection, without witnesses, without a plan, I'll end up disappeared too, or discredited, or worse. So you came here. I came here because I traced the Ashford investigation and found names of people who'd worked for Meridian subsidiaries and might have questions. Your name came up, and when I saw you had a room to rent, she shrugged helplessly. I thought maybe I could learn something, see if you knew anything. I didn't expect to like you. I didn't expect Sophie to be so sweet. I didn't expect this to feel like a home. Marcus stared at the hard drive in her hands, a small piece of technology containing the truth about his wife's death, about dozens of deaths, about a corporate empire built on calculated murder. What do you want from me? I want you to help me make this public, Lena said. Not just leak it to journalists who might get bought off or intimidated. I want to make it undeniable, irrefutable. I want witnesses who can't be silenced. And I want to do it soon because my father's people are looking for me, and eventually they're going to find me. How do you know they're looking? As if in answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. Because, she said quietly, they just figured out where I am. The apartment buzzer rang, harsh and insistent. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Who is that? Corporate security. Lena was already moving, grabbing the hard drive, shoving it into her messenger bag. They'll say they're here to take me home. They'll be polite at first, but if I don't go with them willingly... The buzzer rang again, longer this time, more aggressive. Sophie appeared in her bedroom doorway, rubbing her eyes. Daddy? What's happening? Nothing, baby. Go back to bed. Marcus's mind was racing. He looked at Lena. The fire escape, can you get out? They'll have someone watching it. Then what? Lena met his eyes, and in that moment, Marcus saw something he recognized. The look of someone who'd run out of options and was about to make a desperate choice. Then we answer the door, she said, and we see exactly how much they're willing to do to keep their secrets. The buzzer rang a third time, and someone started pounding on the door. Marcus looked at his daughter, standing small and scared in her pajamas. He looked at Lena, holding a bag that contained the truth about his wife's murder. He looked at the door behind which stood the machinery of a corporation that had already killed once and would absolutely kill again. And he made a choice. Sophie, honey, go to your room and lock the door. Don't come out until I say, okay? Daddy, now baby, please. She ran, and he heard the click of her bedroom lock. Marcus walked to the door, put his hand on the knob, looked back at Lena one more time. Whatever happens, she said quietly, thank you for believing me. He opened the door. 3 men stood in the hallway. They wore suits that probably cost more than Marcus's car, and they had the kind of faces that suggested they were very good at making problems disappear. The one in front smiled with absolutely no warmth. Mr. Hale, we're looking for Lena Castellane. We have reason to believe she's staying with you. Don't know anyone by that name. Really? The man's smile didn't waver. That's unfortunate, because her father is very worried about her, and we'd hate for this to become complicated. Behind Marcus, Lena stepped into view. It's okay, Marcus, she said. Then, to the men, I'm not going with you. The man in front's smile finally died. Miss Castellane, your father sent us to... I know what my father sent you to do, and I'm telling you I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now. Your home? The man looked around the shabby apartment with barely concealed disdain. Don't be ridiculous. Whatever game you're playing... It's not a game, Lena interrupted. Her voice was shaking, but she kept talking. And I'm done pretending. My father is a murderer. Meridian Holdings has poisoned entire cities for profit, and I have proof, documents, evidence, everything. The temperature in the hallway dropped about 20 degrees. Miss Castellane, the man said carefully, you're clearly upset. Why don't we discuss this somewhere private? No. Lena pulled out her phone. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. And if you don't, if you try to force me to go with you, I'm going to start streaming this conversation live, right now, to every platform I have access to, and I'm going to tell the world exactly what Meridian has done. The 3 men exchanged glances. The one in front reached inside his jacket. Marcus stepped between him and Lena. I think the lady said she wants you to leave. For a moment, everything hung in perfect, terrible balance. Then the man's hand emerged from his jacket holding not a weapon, but a business card. Mr. Hale, you seem like a reasonable person, a family man. I'm sure you want what's best for your daughter. He held out the card. If Miss Castellane changes her mind, or if you develop any concerns about your current situation, please call this number. We're here to help. The threat was so polite it almost didn't sound like a threat at all. Marcus took the card. Get out of my building. The men left, but their departure felt less like a retreat and more like a strategic withdrawal. They'd be back, with more men, with lawyers, with whatever tools Meridian Holdings used to eliminate problems. Marcus closed the door and turned to find Lena sitting on the couch, shaking. That was incredibly stupid, he said. I know. They're going to come back. I know. They might come back with the police, or worse. I know. She looked up at him, and her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were fierce. But I meant what I said. I'm done running. I'm done letting him win, even if it costs me everything. Marcus sat down beside her, thought about Emma, about Sophie, about the choice between safety and justice. Okay, he said finally. Then we do this right. We get your evidence to people who can't be bought. We make it public in a way that can't be suppressed. We protect Sophie, and we make damn sure your father pays for what he's done. Lena wiped her eyes. You're insane. Yeah, well, seems to be going around. From down the hall came Sophie's small voice. Daddy, are the bad men gone? Marcus went to unlock her door, pulled his daughter into a hug that was probably too tight, but couldn't be helped. Yeah, baby, they're gone. Are they coming back? He could have lied, should have lied, but Sophie had Emma's eyes, and Emma had always hated being lied to. Maybe, but if they do, we'll be ready. Sophie pulled back and looked at him with that terrible clarity children sometimes possess. Are we going to be okay? Marcus thought about the hard drive full of evidence, the men in expensive suits, the corporation with unlimited resources and absolutely no conscience. He thought about the choice he'd just made, to stand and fight instead of hiding. I don't know, baby, but we're going to try our best. It would have to be enough. Because the truth, the real truth that Marcus was only beginning to understand, was that sometimes the only choice left was between quiet surrender and loud defiance. And he was done being quiet. The night after the men in suits left, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with a baseball bat propped against his chair and watched the door like it might sprout teeth and swallow them whole. Every creak of the building settling, every distant siren, every footstep in the hallway made his pulse spike. Lena had locked herself in a room with the hard drive, and Sophie had eventually fallen asleep curled against him on the couch, one small hand gripping his shirt like an anchor. Around 3 in the morning, Lena emerged from her room looking like she'd aged a decade. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands shook as she poured herself water from the kitchen tap, then stared at it like the liquid itself might be evidence. "Can't drink it, can you?" Marcus said quietly. She shook her head and dumped the water down the sink. "I keep thinking about all the people who didn't know. Who trusted that the water was safe because why wouldn't it be? That's how civilizations work, right? We trust the systems. We trust that someone's checking, someone's making sure we're not being poisoned." And instead, someone was calculating exactly how much poison they could get away with. Cost-benefit analysis. Lena's voice was bitter. That's what the internal memos call it. Acceptable risk. Like people's lives are just numbers in a spreadsheet. Marcus thought about Emma filling Sophie's sippy cup from that same tap, neither of them knowing they were feeding their daughter poison. The rage that had been simmering since he'd seen Lena's photo next to her father crystallized into something cold and purposeful. "Show me," he said. "Show me what you have." They spent the next 3 hours going through the files on Lena's hard drive. It was all there, meticulously documented in the kind of corporate language designed to obscure truth behind bureaucracy. Memos about waste management optimization that actually meant dumping chemicals illegally. Reports showing contamination levels marked as within acceptable parameters when they were 10 times the legal limit. Emails between executives discussing settlements with families of the dead, calculating the cost of hush money versus the cost of proper disposal. And running through all of it like a golden thread was Richard Castellane's electronic signature, approving budgets, authorizing payouts, signing off on decisions that had killed people as casually as someone might approve a vacation request. "How did you get all this?" Marcus asked. "My father's not just wealthy, he's old-fashioned about certain things. Keeps backups of everything on a private server at the house. I've had administrative access since I was 16. He wanted me to learn the business, understand how empires are built." She laughed without humor. "I guess I learned a little too well. Took me 6 months to copy everything without triggering security alerts. Then I ran." "Where have you been staying?" "Hotels at first, paid cash, used fake names, but they were looking for me. My father hired a whole team, corporate security, private investigators, probably some people who don't have business cards. I kept moving, kept trying to figure out how to use what I had without getting myself killed or disappeared into some psychiatric facility where my concerned father could make sure I got the help I needed." Marcus heard the fear beneath her words. "Is that a real risk?" "You met his people. You saw how polite they were, how professional. That's how this works. Rich men don't send thugs to break kneecaps anymore. They send lawyers and PR firms and doctors willing to diagnose inconvenient daughters with disorders that require long-term supervised care." She rubbed her eyes. "I've been terrified every single day that I'd wake up in a locked room with someone explaining how I'm having a breakdown and need to let the adults handle things." "So you found my listing?" "I found 40 listings. Yours was the first one where the address matched a former Meridian employee. I thought I don't know what I thought, that you might know something, that you might be an ally, or at least that you'd be too busy with your own problems to ask too many questions. And instead you got Sophie making you pancakes and me asking all the questions." Lena's expression softened. "Yeah, I got a family. I wasn't expecting that." The word hung in the air between them, fragile and dangerous. Family. Such a small word to contain so much weight. "We need to figure out what to do with this," Marcus said, gesturing at the laptop. "Who do we trust?" "That's the problem. I've been trying to answer that question for months. Journalists. My father owned shares in half the media companies in the state. Law enforcement. Meridian has contributed to every major political campaign for the last decade, including the district attorneys. Federal regulators? They're understaffed, overwhelmed, and one threatening letter from Meridian's legal team would bury this for years. There has to be someone. Maybe, but everyone has a price, Marcus, or a weakness, or something to lose. She closed the laptop. The only way this works is if we make it impossible to suppress. Release everything at once, everywhere. Send it to every news outlet, every watchdog group, every regulatory agency simultaneously. Create so much noise that even Meridian's lawyers can't silence it. And what happens to you when we do that? I'll probably lose everything. My trust fund, my family, any chance of a normal life. I'll be the daughter who betrayed her father, the rich girl who bit the hand that fed her. Half the country will hate me for being a traitor. The other half will hate me for being part of the problem in the first place. You'll also be the person who saved lives. Will I? Or will I just be the person who exposed what already happened? The people who died are still dead, Marcus. Your wife is still dead. Nothing I do can change that. Her voice cracked on the last sentence, and Marcus realized she'd been carrying this guilt like stones in her pockets, weighing her down every day. Emma died because your father decided profit was more important than people, he said carefully. That's on him, not you. But what happens next? Whether more people die, whether he gets away with it, whether there's any justice at all, that's on both of us now. We can't save the people who are gone, but maybe we can stop it from happening again. Lena looked at him with eyes that were simultaneously ancient and young, someone who'd seen too much too soon and couldn't unsee it. You're a good person, Marcus Hale. I'm a desperate person. There's a difference. I don't think there is. Not always. Outside, dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere out there, Richard Castellane was waking up in whatever mansion he called home, probably more concerned about his stock portfolio than the lives he'd destroyed. And somewhere closer, his men were planning their next move, figuring out how to retrieve his daughter and bury the evidence she'd stolen. Marcus stood and stretched, his back protesting from a night in a kitchen chair. Okay, we need a plan, Ed. A real one. Not just release everything and hope. We need protection. We need allies. We need... The apartment buzzer rang. They both froze. It's 6 a.m, Lena whispered. Marcus moved to the intercom, picked it up. Yes? Delivery for Marcus Hale. The voice was neutral, professional. Could have been anyone. I didn't order anything. Someone else ordered it for you. Should I leave it in the lobby? Marcus looked at Lena. She was already grabbing the hard drive, unplugging the laptop, ready to run. Yeah, Marcus said into the intercom. Leave it in the lobby. He waited 5 minutes, then crept downstairs with the baseball bat. The lobby was empty except for a small package sitting on the front desk. Plain brown wrapping, no return address. His name printed in neat block letters. He brought it upstairs and they stared at it like it might explode. Could be a bomb, Lena said. Little small for a bomb. Tracking device? Why would they need to track me? They know where I live. Marcus opened it carefully. Inside was a cell phone, new, expensive, already powered on, and a note written in the same block letters. For when you're ready to talk, we can help each other. The phone buzzed immediately. A single text message appeared. Check your bank account. Marcus pulled out his own phone and logged into his banking app. His checking account, which yesterday had contained $847 and a prayer, now showed a balance of $50,847. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Lena looked over his shoulder. They're paying you off. $50,000. It was more money than Marcus had ever had at once. Enough to cover rent for months. Enough to stop the bleeding, give him time to find a real job, provide for Sophie without constantly calculating whether they could afford milk and bread in the same week. It's a bribe, Lena said flatly. It's my daughter's security. It's blood money. Marcus wanted to argue, but she was right. That $50,000 represented every compromise Richard Castellane had made, every life he'd deemed acceptable collateral damage, every victim who'd been bought off or intimidated into silence. Taking it would make Marcus part of that system, complicit in the same machinery that had killed Emma. But it would also keep Sophie fed. The phone buzzed again. Another text. This is just a deposit. Full payment when we reach an understanding. Think about your daughter. They're not even pretending it's not a threat, Marcus said. They don't have to. They know exactly what they're doing, giving you a taste of financial security, then suggesting it could all go away if you don't cooperate. It's the same thing they did to the families in Ashford. Offer them enough money to rebuild their lives, make them sign NDAs, and suddenly the problem disappears. Some of those families probably needed the money. Of course they did. That's what makes it so evil. They're not targeting villains, they're targeting victims. People who are desperate and scared and just want things to go back to normal. People exactly like... She stopped. People exactly like me, Marcus finished. He looked at the phone, at his bank account, at the number that represented both salvation and damnation. What if I take it? What? What if I take the money, string them along, make them think I'm cooperating while we figure out our real plan? Buy us time. Lena shook her head. They're not stupid, Marcus. The second they think you're playing them, that money disappears and so does any leverage we have. Worse, they'll know we're planning something and they'll move to shut us down before we can act. So we do nothing? So we move faster than they expect. We don't give them time to buy us off or shut us down. We act now, today, before they can... The apartment door shook with the force of someone pounding on it. Not knocking, pounding. Open up, police! Marcus and Lena locked eyes. The choice had just been made for them. Marcus moved to the door and looked through the peephole. Two uniformed officers stood in the hallway, looking official and impatient. Behind them, barely visible, was one of the men in suits from last night. What do you want? Marcus called through the door. We have a report of a missing person, sir. We need to speak with you and verify the well-being of Lena Castellane. She's fine. She's an adult living here of her own free will. We still need to verify that, sir. Please open the door. Marcus looked back at Lena. She was already typing furiously on her laptop, her face pale but determined. What are you doing? He hissed. Uploading. Everything. Every file. If they're here to take me, if they're going to lock me up or make me disappear, then I'm burning it all down right now. Lena, I'm not letting him win, Marcus. Not after everything. Not after your wife. Not after all those people. I'm not letting him win. Her finger hovered over the enter key. The pounding on the door intensified. Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. We have a warrant for entry based on a welfare check. Open the door or we're coming in. Sophie's door opened. She stood in her doorway in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit, tears streaming down her face. Daddy, I'm scared. Everything stopped. The pounding, Lena's typing, Marcus's racing thoughts, all of it compressed into a single moment of crystalline clarity. He looked at his daughter, terrified and small. He looked at Lena, ready to sacrifice everything for justice. He looked at the door, behind which stood the full weight of a system designed to protect power and punish truth. And he made a choice. Don't upload it, he said to Lena. Marcus? Not yet. Not like this. He walked over and pulled his daughter into his arms, felt her small body shaking against him. Sophie, baby. I need you to go back to your room and stay there no matter what happens. Can you do that for me? Are they going to take you away? No, honey. Nobody's taking anybody away. But I need you to be brave for a few more minutes. Can you do that? She nodded against his chest, and he carried her back to her room, tucked her in bed with her rabbit, and kissed her forehead. I love you more than anything in the whole world, he whispered. Remember that, okay? I love you too, Daddy. He closed her door and returned to the living room, where the pounding had reached a crescendo. He could hear the officers discussing breaking down the door. Wait, he called out. I'm opening it. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The two officers stepped inside immediately, hands on their weapons, eyes scanning the apartment like they expected to find a hostage situation. Lena Castellane, one of them said, looking at Lena. That's me. Your father filed a missing person report. He's concerned for your welfare. I'm 23 years old and I'm here by choice. You can tell my father I'm fine and I'll contact him when I'm ready. The officer consulted a notepad. Ma'am, your father has expressed concern about your mental state. He believes you may be in crisis and need professional help. There it was. Exactly what Lena had predicted. The concerned father narrative, the suggestion of mental instability, the framework for making her disappear into the medical legal system where inconvenient truths could be medicated away. I'm not in crisis, Lena said firmly. I'm clear-headed, rational, and making my own decisions. I don't need help, and I'm not going anywhere. The officer looked uncomfortable. Behind him, the man in the suit stepped into view, and his expression was sympathetic in the way a shark might look sympathetic before it bites. Lena, the man said gently, your father just wants to talk. He's worried about you. We can arrange a meeting in a neutral location, just the two of you. No pressure, no judgment, just a conversation. I'm not interested. He's your father. He loves you. He's a murderer, and I have proof. The temperature in the room dropped. The officers exchanged glances. The man in the suit's sympathetic expression evaporated. That's a very serious accusation, he said carefully. It's a very serious crime. Do you have evidence to support this claim? Lena gestured at her laptop. About 70 gigabytes of it. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the man in the suit smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen. Not angry, not threatening, just professionally amused. Officers, I think this confirms Mr. Castellane's concerns about his daughter's mental state. She's clearly experiencing some kind of delusional episode. For her own safety— I'm not delusional, Lena interrupted. And if you try to take me against my will, I'll start screaming every detail I know about Meridian Holdings' criminal activity. Right here, right now, in front of witnesses. I'll make sure everyone in this building hears me. And then I'll upload every file I have to the internet before you can stop me. The man in the suit's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. Calculation. Threat assessment. Miss Castelaine, you're clearly upset. Why don't we all take a breath and— Marcus, Lena said, not taking her eyes off the man. Remember when I said everyone has a price or a weakness or something to lose? I was wrong. Some people are willing to lose everything if it means stopping people like my father. I'm one of those people. Are you? It was a question and a challenge and a plea all at once. Marcus looked at the officers, clearly uncomfortable with the situation they'd walked into. He looked at the man in the suit, representing an organization that had already taken everything that mattered. He looked at Lana, standing her ground against her own family with nothing but courage and stolen data. And he thought about Sophie in her room and Emma in her grave, and the choice between safety and justice that defined every meaningful moment in a person's life. Yeah, he said. I am. The man in the suit sighed like they'd all just made a regrettable but inevitable decision. Officers, I think we need to call for backup. This situation requires you to leave, Marcus interrupted. You don't have a warrant for Lena's arrest. You don't have any legal authority to take her anywhere. And unless these officers plan to violate her civil rights on camera— He pulled out his phone and started recording. I suggest everyone who doesn't live here heads for the door. One of the officers held up his hands. Sir, we're just here to verify Miss Castelaine's welfare. She appears to be safe and here of her own volition. That's all we need to confirm. Then your job is done. The officer looked at his partner, then at the man in the suit, then back at Marcus. We'll file our report. If Miss Castelaine wants to contact her family, that's her choice. We can't force her. Wait, the man in the suit started. Sir, we're not in the business of kidnapping adults who don't want to go somewhere, the officer said firmly. If you have concerns about Miss Castelaine's mental health, you can petition for an involuntary psychiatric hold through the proper legal channels, but that requires a judge's order and a mental health professional's evaluation. We can't just take her. The man in the suit's jaw tightened. Fine. We'll do it properly. He looked at Lena. Your father's not going to stop, you know. He has resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, doctors, people who will testify that you're a danger to yourself. And when they take you, when they put you in a facility where you can get the help you need, what do you think happens to your little treasure trove of data? It goes public, Lena said simply. I've already set up a dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 12 hours, everything uploads automatically. So if I disappear, if I end up institutionalized, if anything happens to me, the world gets to see exactly what kind of man my father is. It was a bluff. Marcus could tell from the slight tremor in her voice, the way her fingers curled into fists. She hadn't had time to set up anything that's sophisticated. But the man in the suit didn't know that, and his expression flickered with uncertainty. "You're making a mistake, Etemt," he said. "Probably. But it's my mistake to make." The officers left first, clearly relieved to be out of a situation that smelled like corporate warfare masquerading as a domestic dispute. The man in the suit lingered in the doorway, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of warmth. "Mr. Hale, you seem like a smart man. Smart enough to understand that this isn't your fight. You have a daughter to think about, a life to rebuild. Meridian Holdings could help with that. We could help with that. All we're asking is that you encourage Miss Castellane to have a conversation with her father. Just talk, that's all. And if I don't? Then you become part of the problem, and problems get solved. Meridian is very good at solving problems." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality, your choice whether you want to accept it or fight it." He straightened his suit jacket. "The offer stands for 24 hours. After that, things get complicated." He left, and Marcus locked the door behind him, threw the deadbolt, and stood there breathing hard like he'd just run a marathon. "That was stupid," Lena said. She was shaking. "That was so incredibly stupid. Now they know we're serious and they're going to come at us with everything." "Yeah. We don't actually have a dead man's switch set up." "I figured." "We don't have a plan." "We'll make one." "Marcus, you don't understand what you just signed up for. These people don't play fair. They don't follow rules. They'll destroy you if you get in their way." "They already destroyed me," Marcus said quietly. "They killed my wife. They poisoned an entire city and called it cost-benefit analysis. What else can they take from me that they haven't already taken?" Sophie. The word hit him like a physical blow, because she was right. He had everything to lose, and it was sleeping in the next room clutching a stuffed rabbit. "So we protect her," Marcus said. "We protect her by making sure your father can't do this to anyone else. We protect her by making sure she grows up in a world where corporations can't murder people and buy their way out of consequences. That's not how the world works." "Then maybe it's time to change how the world works." Lena laughed, sharp and bitter. "You're an idealist." "I'm a father who's tired of being afraid." She studied him for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, from desperation to determination, from fear to something that might have been hope. "Okay," she said. "Okay. If we're doing this, we do it right. No more reacting, no more waiting for them to make the next move. We go on offense." "What do you have in mind?" Lena opened her laptop and pulled up a folder Marcus hadn't seen before. Inside were dozens of files labeled with names and locations, journalists, lawyers, activists, politicians who'd publicly criticized Meridian Holdings. "I've been researching for months, looking for people who might actually care, who have the platform and the courage to do something with what I have. The problem is that most of them can be bought or intimidated, but there are a few—" She clicked on a specific file. "There are a few who might be different." The file contained information on a journalist named Catherine Cross, mid-40s, based in New York, with a reputation for investigative work that had brought down 2 senators and a pharmaceutical CEO. Her articles had won awards. More importantly, she'd turned down a cushy job at a major network to stay independent. "You think she'll help?" Marcus asked. "I think she'll listen, and if we give her the story with enough supporting evidence, she might actually run it. She has the credibility and the platform to make this news that can't be ignored. And if Meridian's lawyers threaten her, then we need to give her so much documentation, so many smoking guns, that the story becomes bigger than any legal threat. We need to make this undeniable." Marcus thought about the files they'd reviewed that morning. The memos, the emails, the damning evidence of systematic poisoning for profit. If even half of it went public, it would be a nuclear bomb in the corporate world. "How do we contact her without tipping off your father?" "Carefully. She has a secure email address for sources. We send her enough to prove we're legitimate, offer the full cash in exchange for a meeting, somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses. And then? And then we hope she's as incorruptible as her reputation suggests, because if she's not—" Lena didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. They spent the next several hours crafting the email. Every word mattered, Too much detail, and Meridian's lawyers would claim trade secrets or national security. Too little, and Cross might dismiss them as cranks. They needed to hit the perfect balance of credible, compelling, and urgent. Finally, they had something that worked. Ms. Cross, I am the daughter of Richard Castellane, CEO of Meridian Holdings. I have evidence proving that Meridian has systematically contaminated municipal water supplies in 7 U.S. cities over the past 5 years, resulting in at least 43 documented deaths and hundreds of illnesses. The contamination was deliberate, a strategy to devalue property for acquisition. I have internal memos, financial records, and executive communications that prove knowledge and intent at the highest levels. I am prepared to provide you with all evidence in exchange for your guarantee of publication and protection as a confidential source. Lives depend on this story being told. I hope you're the journalist who can tell it. LC. Lena's finger hovered over the send button. Last chance to back out, she said. You really think I'm backing out now? I think you're a good man who got dragged into someone else's nightmare. I think you deserve better than this. Marcus thought about Emma, about the mornings she'd made coffee from poisoned water, about the trust she'd had in systems that had failed her, about Sophie, who deserved to grow up in a world where corporations couldn't kill with impunity. Send it, he said. Lena clicked send, and the email vanished into the digital void. For a moment, they both stared at the screen like it might somehow reveal the future. Now what? Marcus asked. Now we wait, and we hope Catherine Cross checks her email before Meridian figures out what we've done. But waiting, Marcus was learning, was its own special kind of torture. Catherine Cross responded in 47 minutes. The reply was brief, clinical. The words of someone who'd learned not to show excitement until she'd verified the facts. Interesting claims. Need proof before we proceed. Can you provide sample documentation? Redact sensitive personal information but include enough detail to verify authenticity. CC. Lena's hands shook as she prepared the response package. She selected 3 documents: a memo from Richard Castellane approving a waste disposal optimization plan that was actually a blueprint for illegal dumping, an internal email chain discussing settlement amounts for Ashford victims, and a chemical analysis report that had been deliberately falsified before submission to the EPA. Each one was damning on its own. Together they painted a picture of systematic, calculated murder. She attached the files and typed a simple response. This is 5% of what I have. The rest comes with guarantees. Send. Marcus watched her close the laptop and press her palms against her eyes. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation with the police and her father's men was wearing off, leaving behind exhaustion and fear that sat on her shoulders like a physical weight. You should eat something, Marcus said. I can't. You should try anyway. He made scrambled eggs because it was the only thing he could cook without thinking, and thinking was dangerous right now. If he thought too hard about what they'd just set in motion, about the forces they were challenging, about the potential consequences for Sophie, he'd lose his nerve entirely. Sophie emerged from her room as he was plating the eggs, her stuffed rabbit trailing from one hand. She looked small and uncertain, the way children do when they sense that the adults around them are barely holding it together. Are the police coming back? She asked. No, baby. They were just checking on Lena. Why? Marcus looked at Lena, who was staring at her untouched eggs like they might contain answers. Because sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems, and other grown-ups try to help solve them in ways that don't always make sense. Sophie considered this with the seriousness of someone trying to understand a world that kept breaking its own rules. Is Lena in trouble? Not the kind of trouble you're thinking of, sweetie. What kind of trouble, then? Lena looked up, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. The kind where you have to choose between what's easy and what's right, and the right choice is really, really hard. Sophie nodded like she understood, which maybe she did. Kids who'd lost a parent learned early that life wasn't fair and choices weren't simple. My teacher says doing the right thing is always good, Sophie offered. Your teacher's smart, Lena said, but she probably also hasn't had to do something right that might hurt people you love. Like who? Like your dad, because he's helping me, and that might make some bad people angry at him. Sophie's expression hardened in a way that was far too mature for a 7-year-old. Bad people are already angry at us. They took away Mommy. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had never really stopped burning. Marcus felt something crack in his chest, pride and grief and rage all twisted together. "Yeah, baby," he said quietly. "They did. So we should stop them from taking away other people's mommies, right?" Lena made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Right, that's exactly right." Sophie climbed into the chair next to Lena and stole a piece of her toast. "Okay, but you still have to eat. Daddy says you can't fight bad guys on an empty stomach." "I said that? You say it every time I don't want breakfast before school." Marcus smiled despite everything. "Eat your eggs, Lena. Kids' orders." They ate in silence. The three of them gathered around a kitchen table in an apartment that smelled like old coffee and uncertainty, and for a moment it felt almost normal, like they were just a family sharing a meal, not three people waiting for the world to either save them or destroy them. Catherine Cross's next email arrived while Sophie was watching cartoons and Marcus was washing dishes. Lena's laptop chimed and she lunged for it, nearly knocking over her water glass. "What does it say?" Marcus asked. Lena's face had gone pale. "She wants to meet, tomorrow, 2 p.m., public location of our choosing. She'll come alone and she guarantees confidentiality until we decide to go on record." "Do you trust her?" "I don't know. But we're out of options and out of time. My father's people know we have the files now. They're going to escalate. If we don't move fast, they'll find a way to bury this before it ever sees daylight." Marcus dried his hands on a dish towel and tried to think strategically. "Where do we meet her?" "Somewhere public, lots of witnesses, security cameras. Somewhere Meridian can't make us disappear without drawing attention." "The library," Marcus said. "Main branch downtown. It's always crowded. Multiple exits, security guards. And it's a public institution. If something happens there, it's a government facility incident, not just some random crime." Lena nodded slowly. "That could work. We bring copies of everything on encrypted drives. Meet her in the reading room where there are cameras and witnesses. If she seems legitimate, we give her the story. If something feels wrong, we walk away. And if Meridian's people show up, then we make a scene. Start shouting about corporate murder, contaminated water, whatever it takes to create witnesses. They can't silence everyone." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. Marcus typed the response while Lena looked over his shoulder. "Main library, downtown branch, second floor reading room, 2 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone. We'll have the full documentation." Send. The die was cast. Whatever happened next, there was no taking it back. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the ambient sounds of the apartment, the refrigerator humming, the pipes creaking, Sophie's soft breathing from her room. Normal sounds, the soundtrack of an ordinary life that was about to become anything but ordinary. Around midnight, he heard Lena's door open, footsteps in the hallway, the quiet click of the bathroom door. He waited, but she didn't return to her room. After several minutes, he got up and found her sitting on the couch in the dark, her laptop open, but the screen blank. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "I keep thinking about what happens after tomorrow. Best case scenario, Catherine runs the story and my father gets arrested. His empire collapses. Stockholders lose billions. Thousands of people lose their jobs. My family's name becomes synonymous with corporate murder. That's the best case scenario? The worst case is that we end up in a ditch somewhere and the story never sees daylight. So yeah, public humiliation and financial ruin is the best case." Marcus sat down beside her. "You don't have to do this. We could still walk away. Take the money they offered, sign the NDAs, move on with our lives. Could you? Could you really take money from the people who killed your wife and pretend everything's fine?" He thought about Emma, about the months of watching her fade, of holding her hand through treatments that bought time but not hope, of the moment she'd looked at him and said she was tired, so tired, and he'd had to let her go. About Sophie asking why Mommy wasn't coming home and having to explain that sometimes people left even when you loved them more than anything in the world. "No," he said. "I couldn't." "Then we do this. We see it through. Whatever happens." "Whatever happens," he agreed. They sat in the darkness together, two people who'd found themselves on the same side of a war they'd never asked to fight, and tried to believe that courage was enough. Morning came too fast and too slow simultaneously. Marcus made breakfast while Lena prepared the documentation, copying files onto 3 separate encrypted drives. One for Catherine, one backup, and one that she'd hide somewhere Meridian couldn't find it if everything went wrong. Sophie sensed the tension and went quiet, the way children do when they know the adults are dealing with something big and scary. She ate her cereal without complaint and got dressed without being asked and hugged Marcus extra tight before he walked her to the bus stop. "Are you going to be okay, Daddy?" "Yeah, baby. I'm going to be fine." Promise? He wanted to promise. Wanted to tell her everything would be all right, that the world was safe and justice prevailed and bad people always got caught. But he'd already lied to her enough. "I promise I'm going to try my hardest to come home to you tonight," he said instead. "And I promise that everything I'm doing is to make the world a little bit better. Can that be enough?" Sophie thought about it with that serious expression she got when considering important questions. "Okay, but you still have to come home." "I will. I love you more than anything." "Love you too, Daddy." He watched her get on the bus, watched it pull away with her small face pressed against the window, and felt his heart breaking and hardening simultaneously. Whatever happened at that library, he was going to make sure his daughter grew up in a world where corporations couldn't poison people and buy their way out of consequences. Back at the apartment, Lena was pacing like a caged animal. She'd changed clothes 3 times and was currently wearing jeans and a simple black sweater, trying to look serious, but not like she was trying too hard. Her hair was pulled back, and she wasn't wearing any jewelry except the gold bracelet she never took off. "Ready?" Marcus asked. "No, but we're doing this anyway." They took the bus downtown because Marcus's car was unreliable and they couldn't risk breaking down. The ride was tense and silent, both of them watching the other passengers like any one of them might be a Meridian operative. Probably paranoid, but paranoia seemed appropriate given the circumstances. The library was a massive granite building that looked like a temple to knowledge, all columns and steps and architectural gravitas. Marcus had taken Sophie there dozens of times for story hour and the free Wi-Fi. It had always felt safe, neutral, a place where people came to learn and grow and exist peacefully. Today it felt like a battlefield. They arrived early and scoped out the second-floor reading room. It was exactly as Marcus remembered: long tables, comfortable chairs, walls lined with reference books, and a security camera in the corner with a clear view of the entire space. A dozen people were scattered throughout the room, reading or working on laptops or just existing in the quiet sanctuary that libraries provided. They chose a table in the center of the room with sight lines to all the entrances. Lena set her messenger bag on the table, the encrypted drives hidden inside along with her laptop. Marcus positioned himself so he could see both doors and the stairwell. 1:45, 15 minutes early. They waited. 2 o'clock came and went. No Catherine Cross. "She's not coming," Lena whispered. "Give her time. Could it be traffic?" 2:15. Still nothing. Lena was starting to look panicked, her fingers drumming on the table, her eyes darting to the doors every few seconds. Marcus was about to suggest they leave when a woman in her mid-40s with graying hair and sharp eyes walked into the room carrying a worn leather satchel. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on them with the precision of someone who knew exactly who she was looking for. She walked over and set her satchel on the table. "Lena Castellane?" she said quietly. "Yes." "Catherine Cross. Sorry I'm late. Had to make sure I wasn't followed." She pulled out a chair and sat down, her movements efficient and professional. "You have 10 minutes to convince me this is worth my time. Go." Lena pulled out one of the encrypted drives and slid it across the table. "Everything I told you in the email is true. Meridian Holdings has systematically contaminated municipal water supplies in 7 cities. The contamination was deliberate. They wanted to devalue property so they could buy it cheap and develop it at a profit. People died. Dozens of people." "You said you had proof." "That drive contains memos, emails, financial records, chemical analyses, everything." Catherine picked up the drive and turned it over in her fingers. "This could be fabricated." "It's not. You're the CEO's daughter. You have access to company letterhead, email systems. You could have created all of this." "Why would I do that?" "To hurt your father, to get attention, to cash in on a tell-all book deal. There are 100 reasons why a rich kid might fabricate a scandal. Lena's jaw tightened. I'm risking everything to give you this story. My family, my inheritance, probably my freedom. If I wanted attention or money, there are easier ways. So why are you doing it? Because 43 people are dead. Because my father ordered their deaths as casually as you'd order coffee. Because someone has to stop him. Catherine studied her with the intensity of someone who'd spent a career learning to separate truth from lies. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Okay, let's say I believe you. Let's say everything on this drive is legitimate. What do you want from me? I want you to publish it, all of it. I want the world to know what Meridian did. I want justice for the people they killed. Justice is a legal concept. I'm a journalist. Best I can do is truth. Then I'll settle for truth. Catherine opened her satchel and pulled out a small recording device. I need to ask you some questions. On the record, if your story checks out, if the documents are authentic, I'll run it. But you need to understand what that means. Once this is public, there's no taking it back. Your life as you know it is over. My life as I know it is already over, Lena said. I've been running for months, living in fear, watching over my shoulder. At least this way, when it ends, it'll mean something. Catherine hit record and launched into questions with the precision of a surgeon. Who, what, when, where? How do you know? Can you prove it? Who else has seen this? Why should anyone believe you? Lena answered each one calmly, methodically, her voice steady even as her hands shook. Marcus watched the room, watched the other patrons, watched for any sign that Meridian had found them. Everything seemed normal. Just another afternoon at the library. People reading, studying, living their lives while 3 people at a center table discussed corporate murder like it was a graduate thesis. Then he saw them. 2 men in business casual clothes entering from opposite doors. Not the same men from the apartment, but the same type. Controlled, professional, scanning the room with practiced efficiency. One of them made eye contact with Marcus, and his expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. We've got company, Marcus said quietly. Lena and Catherine looked up. The 2 men were walking toward them now, not rushing but not casual either. Purposeful. Are they yours? Catherine asked Lena. Meridian Security. Catherine's expression hardened. Then we've got about 30 seconds before this gets interesting. She reached into her satchel and pulled out her phone, opened the camera app, and hit record. Gentlemen, she said loudly enough to draw attention, I'm Catherine Cross with Independent Investigative Journalism. Are you here in an official capacity? The men stopped. One of them smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. We're here to escort Miss Castellane home. Her father is worried about her. She's an adult. She doesn't need escorting. Nevertheless, Mr. Castellane has asked us to ensure his daughter's safety. I'm recording this, Catherine said, angling her phone so it captured both men. And I'm a credentialed journalist conducting an interview with a willing source. If you interfere with that, you're interfering with freedom of the press. The man's smile evaporated. Ma'am, this is a family matter. It doesn't concern you. Actually, it concerns every citizen who drinks tap water. Your employer has been poisoning municipal water supplies for profit. That's a story that concerns everyone. The words hung in the air like a grenade. Around the reading room, people were starting to look up from their books, sensing drama. The second man spoke for the first time. That's a serious accusation. I hope you have evidence to support it. I do, Catherine said. Hours of it, on the record, with documentation. And if anything happens to me or my sources, it all goes public immediately. Nothing's going to happen to anyone, the first man said, but his tone suggested otherwise. We just want Miss Castellane to come home. I'm not going anywhere, Lena said, standing up. Her voice was shaking but loud, carrying across the quiet room. My name is Lena Castellane. My father is Richard Castellane, CEO of Meridian Holdings, and he's a murderer. The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the reading room was staring now. A librarian had appeared at one of the doors, looking concerned. Someone else was recording on their phone. My father's company deliberately poisoned the water supply in 7 American cities, Lena continued, her voice getting stronger. They contaminated it with industrial chemicals to force property devaluation so they could buy land cheap. 43 people died. Hundreds more got sick. And my father approved every decision that made it happen. Miss Castellane, you're clearly unwell, the first man started. I have proof, Lena shouted. She pulled her laptop out of her bag and opened it, turning the screen so everyone could see the documents displayed. Internal memos, email chains, financial records, chemical analyses, everything. The man lunged for the laptop. Marcus stepped between them. Don't, Marcus said quietly. There are cameras, witnesses. You grab that laptop and you're committing assault in front of a room full of people. The man's hand hovered in the air, caught between training and calculation. Catherine was still recording. The librarian was on her phone, probably calling security. Other patrons had their phones out now, capturing everything. Marcus Hale, the man said, recognition flashing in his eyes. We looked into you. Former Northridge employee. Wife died of cancer 2 years ago. You lost your job. You're desperate. Miss Castellane is paying you to support her delusions. My wife didn't die of cancer, Marcus said, and his voice carried across the room with absolute conviction. She was poisoned by contaminated water that Meridian Holdings deliberately allowed into the municipal supply. Emma Hale, age 34, died after 11 months of suffering because your employer decided her life was worth less than a quarterly profit margin. Someone in the room gasped. The first man's professional composure cracked for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. You can't prove that, he said. Actually, Catherine interjected, they can. I've reviewed the documentation. Chemical signatures match, timeline matches. There are at least 42 other cases just like Emma Hale's, and it's all going to be in my article, which goes live in, she checked her watch, approximately 3 hours. So you can try to stop us, or you can walk away and start looking for a good lawyer. Your choice. The two men looked at each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Then the first man pulled out his phone and made a call, turning away and speaking in low tones Marcus couldn't hear. The reading room had transformed from a sanctuary of quiet study into something else entirely, a stage where truth and power were colliding in real time. Marcus could feel the weight of all those eyes, all those cameras, all those witnesses who'd accidentally stumbled into the moment where a corporate empire started to crack. The man finished his call and turned back, his expression grim. Mr. Castellane would like to speak with his daughter, in person. He's on his way here now. No, Lena said. He's your father. He deserves the chance to respond to these accusations. He had a chance to respond by not committing mass murder. He chose differently. Lena, please, think about what you're doing. Your family, your future, everything you're throwing away. I'm thinking about the 43 people who don't have a future because of my family. I'm thinking about all the children who lost parents, all the parents who lost children. I'm thinking about Marcus's daughter growing up without a mother. That's what I'm thinking about. The man opened his mouth to respond, but the librarian had arrived with 2 security guards and a very stern expression. Gentlemen, she said firmly, unless you're here to use library resources, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disturbing our patrons. We're here on private business. You're here making a scene. Either conduct yourselves appropriately or leave the premises. One of the security guards, a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd dealt with far worse than corporate thugs, put her hand on her radio. Should I call the police? The Meridian men exchanged another glance, then back toward the door. This isn't over, the first one said. Actually, Catherine said, still recording, I think it is. You just threatened a journalist and her sources in front of a dozen witnesses while we were discussing your employer's crimes. That's going in the article too. The men left, but Marcus knew they'd just be regrouping, planning, reporting back to Richard Castellane that his daughter had just gone nuclear in the most public way possible. Catherine lowered her phone and looked at Lena with something that might have been respect. Well, that was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever witnessed. Possibly both. Did you get it all? Every second, including your confession, which makes you a named source. You understand you can't take that back, right? I don't want to take it back. Catherine nodded and started packing up her things with quick, efficient movements. Okay, here's what happens now. I'm going back to my office to verify everything on this drive. If it checks out, and based on what I saw, it will, I'm publishing tonight. Full story, names, documents, everything. It's going to explode. Good. But you need protection, both of you. Meridian's going to come at you hard. Legally, financially, probably physically if they think they can get away with it. Where do we go? Marcus asked. Somewhere public. Somewhere with cameras and witnesses. And you call a lawyer. A good one. Someone who specializes in whistleblower protection. Catherine pulled out a business card and scribbled a name and number on the back. James Morrison. Tell him I sent you. He'll help. She handed the card to Lena, then gathered the rest of her things. I have to go. I need to get this verified and published before Meridian figures out how to stop me. But you did the right thing today, both of you. That matters. Will it be enough? Lena asked quietly. Truth is never enough by itself, but it's a start. Catherine paused at the edge of the table. For what it's worth, your mother would be proud of you. Lena's face crumpled for just a second before she controlled it. My mother's been dead for 6 years. Then she's been proud of you for 6 years. Take care of yourself, Lena Castellane. The fight's just beginning. Catherine Cross walked out of the library, carrying a drive full of evidence that would bring down an empire, and left Marcus and Lena standing in a reading room full of strangers who'd just witnessed the opening salvo of a war. The librarian approached cautiously. Are you two all right? Do you need me to call the police? No, Marcus said. Thank you, but we're okay. That thing you said about the water, is it true? Marcus looked at her tired eyes, her careful expression, and wondered how many people she knew who'd gotten sick for no apparent reason, how many funerals she'd attended, how many times she'd drunk from a fountain and never thought to question whether it was safe. Yeah, he said, it's true. She nodded slowly, processing. Then I hope you get them. Whoever did that, I hope they pay. So do we. They left the library walking fast but not running, aware that Meridian's men were probably watching from somewhere nearby. Marcus kept one hand in his pocket wrapped around his phone, ready to call 911 if anyone tried to grab them. Lena clutched her messenger bag like it contained the secrets of the universe, which in a way it did. They made it 3 blocks before they saw the car. A black SUV with tinted windows pulling up beside them. The back door opened and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. Not the security team. Someone older, more polished, more dangerous. Richard Castellane looked exactly like his photos. Silver hair, strong jaw, the kind of face that inspired confidence and won elections. He looked at his daughter with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. Disappointment, maybe. Or calculation. Lena, he said, get in the car. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you. I'm your father. You're a murderer. Richard's jaw tightened. You've made some very serious accusations in a very public forum. Accusations that aren't true. Now get in the car before you embarrass yourself further. They are true, and you know it. I have the files, the memos with your signature, the emails you sent, the reports you falsified, everything. Files can be faked. Emails can be spoofed. You're a troubled young woman who's had a difficult few years. Anyone can see that. Catherine Cross doesn't think so. She's publishing the story tonight. For the first time, Richard's composure slipped. Just for a second, but it was enough. You gave the files to a journalist? I gave them to everyone. Journalists, lawyers, activists. By tomorrow morning, the whole world is going to know what you did. Richard stepped closer, and Marcus moved between them instinctively. Richard looked at him like he was something unpleasant stuck to his shoe. Mr. Hale, you're making a mistake. My daughter is using you. When this all falls apart, when she recants and admits she fabricated everything, you'll be left holding the bag. Is that what you want for your daughter? For Sophie? The sound of his daughter's name in this man's mouth made Marcus see red. Don't, he said quietly. Don't say her name. Don't even think about her. I'm simply pointing out that you have responsibilities, obligations, a child who depends on you, and you're throwing it all away to support my daughter's delusions. They're not delusions. You killed my wife. You poisoned her and 42 other people because it was cheaper than doing things right. And now you're going to pay for it. Richard smiled, and it was the coldest thing Marcus had ever seen. Pay for it? With what? A journalist's expose? Please. I have lawyers who will tie this up in court for decades. I have PR firms that will make your wife look like a drug addict who died of her own poor choices. I have politicians who owe me favors and judges who appreciate campaign contributions. By the time I'm done, you'll be the villain and I'll be the victim of a troubled daughter's fantasies. Maybe, Marcus said, or maybe you're underestimating how angry people get when they find out they've been poisoned for profit. Richard's expression darkened. Last chance, Lena. Get in the car. Come home. We'll fix this together. I'll get you help. We'll make this right. The only thing that makes this right is you in prison. Then you've made your choice. Richard stepped back toward the SUV. I hope you're ready for the consequences. He got in, and the SUV pulled away, leaving them standing on a downtown sidewalk in the early afternoon sun while the empire started to crumble. Lena was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders and guided her to a nearby bench. That was him, she said numbly. That was my father, and he doesn't care. He looked me in the eyes, and he doesn't even care. I know. All those people, all those deaths, and it's just business to him, just numbers. I know. She turned and buried her face against his shoulder and sobbed. Marcus held her and watched the street for black SUVs and wondered how they were going to survive what came next. Because Richard Castellane had just declared war, and wars had casualties. They just had to make sure they weren't among them. They didn't go back to the apartment. Marcus called Mrs. Chen from 3 blocks away and asked her to pick up Sophie from the bus stop, told her it was an emergency and he'd explain later. Mrs. Chen, bless her suspicious heart, asked exactly 0 questions and simply said she'd make Sophie dinner and keep her safe until he came back. Where do we go? Lena asked. She'd stopped crying, but her eyes were still red, her voice hoarse. Somewhere public. Somewhere they can't make us disappear. They ended up at a 24-hour diner called Rosie's that smelled like coffee and bacon grease and had the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. Marcus chose a booth in the back corner with clear sight lines to both entrances and the kitchen exit. Old habits from watching too many crime shows, but paranoia felt appropriate. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that said Gladys brought them coffee without being asked. You two look like you've had a day. You have no idea, Marcus said. Honey, I've worked diners for 30 years. I've seen every kind of day there is. You want pie? Sure. She brought them apple pie that was probably from yesterday but tasted like comfort anyway. They ate in silence, checking their phones obsessively, waiting for the world to either save them or swallow them whole. Catherine Cross's article went live at 7:43 p.m. Lena's phone lit up first with news alerts, then Marcus's, then seemingly every phone in the diner as the story started spreading like wildfire across social media. The headline was stark and damning. Meridian Holdings CEO ordered systematic water contamination that killed dozens, internal documents reveal. The article was everything Catherine had promised, meticulous, detailed, devastating. She'd laid out the evidence piece by piece, building a case that was impossible to deny. The memos with Richard Castellane's signature, the email chains discussing which cities were optimal targets for contamination-based property devaluation, the falsified EPA reports, the settlement agreements with NDAs attached, the chemical analyses showing exact matches between Meridian's industrial waste and the contaminants found in 7 municipal water systems. And she'd named names, not just Richard Castellane, but the executives who'd implemented the plan, the scientists who'd falsified data, the lawyers who'd crafted the settlements, the politicians who'd looked the other way. She'd torn the entire operation open and exposed it to daylight. The response was immediate and explosive. Within 20 minutes, the story had been picked up by major news networks. Within an hour, it was trending on every social media platform. By 8 p.m., there were protesters gathering outside Meridian Holdings headquarters with signs reading "Corporate Murderers" and "Justice for the Victims." Marcus watched the news coverage on his phone, images of angry crowds and shocked anchors and Meridian's stock price plummeting in real time. It was surreal, watching a corporation that had seemed untouchable just hours ago suddenly bleeding out in public view. It's working, Lena whispered. People are listening. People are angry, Marcus corrected. That's not the same thing as justice. It's a start. James Morrison, the lawyer Catherine had recommended, called Lena at 8:30. He had a voice like gravel and the kind of calm that suggested he'd navigated worse storms than this. Miss Castellane, I've reviewed the article and the documentation Catherine provided. This is going to get ugly fast. Meridian will come at you with everything: defamation suits, criminal charges if they can manufacture them, psychiatric evaluations to question your credibility. We need to get ahead of it. How? First, you stop talking to anyone except me and Catherine. No social media, no interviews, no statements. Every word you say can and will be used against you. Second, we file for protective orders. Third, we coordinate with law enforcement before they get pressured by Meridian's lawyers to treat you as a suspect instead of a witness. What about Marcus? Mr. Hale is in a similar position. If he's willing, I can represent him as well. Pro bono, given the circumstances. Marcus took the phone. Why would you work for free? Because I spent 15 years watching corporations buy their way out of accountability, and because my sister died of a brain tumor 3 years ago after the fracking company contaminated her well water. The company settled with her family for $75,000 and an NDA. So yeah, I'll work for free if it means taking down people like Richard Castellane. Okay, we're in. Good. Stay somewhere public tonight. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., meet me at my office. We'll prepare your statements for law enforcement and start building your legal protection. And Mr. Hale, yeah? Keep your daughter somewhere safe. If Meridian's people can't get to you directly, they'll look for leverage. Don't give them any. The call ended and Marcus immediately dialed Mrs. Chen. How's Sophie? She's fine. Ate 3 pieces of pizza and is currently beating my nephew at Mario Kart. You want to tell me what's going on? Turn on the news, any channel. He heard rustling, then Mrs. Chen's sharp intake of breath as she obviously saw the coverage. Mother of Mercy, that's the company you worked for? Yeah. And that girl in the apartment, that's the CEO's daughter? Yeah. So when I said you should be careful about who you let into your home, I was even more right than I thought. Mrs. Chen, I need a favor. Can Sophie stay with you tonight? Maybe tomorrow too? There was a pause, and when Mrs. Chen spoke again, her voice was softer. That child can stay with me as long as you need. You go do what you have to do. And Marcus, your wife would be proud of you. His throat closed up. Thanks. He hung up and looked at Lena, who was scrolling through news coverage with an expression of numb disbelief. It's everywhere, she said. Every major news outlet. International coverage. The UN is calling for an investigation. Congress is demanding hearings. The stock market suspended trading on Meridian shares because they dropped so fast it triggered automatic circuit breakers. What about your father? She pulled up a video. Richard Castellane was standing outside Meridian headquarters, surrounded by lawyers and cameras, his expression a careful mask of wounded dignity. These allegations are completely false, he was saying. My daughter Lena is a troubled young woman who has struggled with mental health issues for years. We've tried to get her help, but she's refused treatment. Now she's fabricated these outrageous lies with the help of opportunists who see a chance to profit from attacking a successful company. We will vigorously defend ourselves against these baseless accusations and pursue legal action against everyone involved in this malicious campaign. The camera zoomed in on his face, and Marcus saw something there that the reporters probably missed, a flicker of rage beneath the performance of paternal concern. He's scared, Lena said. Good. He should be. They stayed in the diner until midnight, watching the news coverage and jumping every time someone walked past their booth. Gladys kept refilling their coffee and eventually brought them sandwiches they hadn't ordered because apparently they looked like they needed feeding. Around 12:30, Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Hale? A woman's voice, professional and careful. My name is Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. I'm calling regarding the Meridian Holdings investigation. Marcus's heart rate spiked. Okay. We'd like to interview you and Miss Castellane tomorrow regarding your knowledge of the company's activities. This is voluntary at this point, but we strongly encourage your cooperation. We have a lawyer. That's fine. Bring him. We're not trying to build a case against either of you. We're trying to build a case against Meridian Holdings and its executives. You're witnesses, not suspects. How do I know this is real? How do I know you're actually FBI and not someone Meridian hired to pretend? There was a pause, then something that might have been approval in her voice. Smart question. Call the FBI field office main number. It's public record. Ask for Agent Sarah Chen in white-collar crime. They'll transfer you to me and you'll know the call is legitimate. We can schedule the interview then. Okay, I'll call you back. He hung up and looked at Lena. FBI wants to interview us. That's good, right? I think so. James said we needed to coordinate with law enforcement before Meridian could poison the well. They called James Morrison, who was apparently still awake at 12:30 a.m. because lawyers working cases like this didn't sleep. Perfect, he said when Marcus explained. I'll contact Agent Chen directly, verify her credentials, and set up the interview. This is actually excellent news. FBI involvement means federal charges are on the table. RICO statutes, conspiracy, possibly even domestic terrorism depending on how they frame the poisoning. Meridian's lawyers are good, but they can't buy their way out of federal prosecution. What happens to Lena? If she cooperates fully, if she provides testimony and documentation, if she helps build the case, immunity, most likely. She was a minor when most of this happened, and she had no operational role in the crimes. She's a whistleblower, not a co-conspirator. And what happens to her father? James's voice turned cold. If there's any justice in this world, prison. For a very long time. They finally left the diner around 1 a.m., stepping out into a night that felt different somehow. The same city, the same streets, but the air tasted like change, like the moment before a storm breaks when you can feel the electricity building. They walked to a budget hotel 3 blocks away and paid cash for a room with 2 beds and a view of the parking lot. Marcus had maybe $200 left to his name, but it didn't matter. Money had stopped meaning what it used to mean. Lena sat on one of the beds and stared at her phone, at the news coverage that showed her father's empire crumbling in real time. I thought I'd feel different, she said quietly. I thought when this moment came, I'd feel victorious or relieved or something. But I just feel sad. He's still your father. He's a monster who happens to share my DNA. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. She looked at him with eyes that had aged years in the past 24 hours. Do you hate him for what he did to your wife? Marcus thought about it, really considered the question. I did. When I first found out, when I saw the evidence, I wanted to kill him with my bare hands. But now I just want him to face consequences. I want him to understand that he doesn't get to destroy lives and walk away. That's enough. Is it? It has to be. Hate takes too much energy, and I need that energy for Sophie. Lena nodded and lay back on the bed, still fully clothed. Thank you for helping me, for believing me, for risking everything when you had every reason to walk away. You were making pancakes for my daughter. Hard to walk away from someone who makes pancakes. She laughed, sharp and bitter and surprised. Best reason I've ever heard. They tried to sleep, but it was futile. Every sound in the hallway, every car in the parking lot, every notification on their phones sent adrenaline spiking through their systems. Around 3 a.m., Marcus gave up and turned on the television. Every news channel was still covering the story, showing footage of protesters outside Meridian facilities across the country, interviewing victims' families who were finally being heard after years of forced silence. One interview caught his attention, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that looked like they'd cried themselves dry. My son was 17, she was saying to the reporter. Star athlete, straight A's. He started having seizures out of nowhere. The doctors couldn't figure out why. By the time they diagnosed the brain tumor, it was too late. He died 6 months later. And now I find out it was because Meridian poisoned our water. That my son died because some corporation decided profit was more important than children's lives? Her voice broke and the camera cut away, but not before Marcus saw the raw fury in her expression. The look of someone who just learned their grief had an author. That's going to happen 43 times, Lena whispered. She was awake too, watching. 43 families learning that their loved ones were murdered for money. How do you even process that? One day at a time. Same way you process anything impossible. The news shifted to financial coverage. Meridian's stock had lost 70% of its value in 12 hours. The board of directors had announced an emergency meeting. Several executives had already resigned. Banks were distancing themselves. Partners were severing contracts. The entire corporate edifice that Richard Castellane had built over 30 years was collapsing with the speed of controlled demolition. At 7 a.m., James Morrison called with an update. FBI interview is set for 10 a.m. I'll meet you at the field office. In the meantime, the district attorney has announced they're opening a criminal investigation. State Attorney General is doing the same. And get this, the SEC has frozen Meridian's assets pending investigation into securities fraud. They can't move money, can't sell assets, can't do anything except watch their empire burn. That was fast, Marcus said. That's what happens when you piss off the entire country simultaneously. Politicians who were perfectly happy taking Meridian's campaign contributions yesterday are tripping over themselves to condemn the company today. Nobody wants to be seen as soft on corporate poisoners. It's political suicide. What about Richard Castellane specifically? Still at large, but his lawyers are already negotiating surrender terms. They know arrest is inevitable. They're just trying to control the optics. Turn himself in rather than get perp walked out of his mansion on live TV. Will he actually go to prison? Marcus, the man ordered the poisoning of municipal water supplies that killed 43 people. He's looking at multiple counts of negligent homicide at minimum, possibly murder if prosecutors can prove intent. Add in conspiracy, racketeering, securities fraud, obstruction of justice. Yeah, he's going to prison. The only question is whether it's 20 years or life. After the call ended, Marcus and Lena got ready in silence. She'd been wearing the same clothes for 2 days and looked exhausted and small, but when she met his eyes in the mirror, there was steel there too. Whatever happens today, she said, I want you to know I meant what I said about family. You and Sophie, you gave me something I didn't even know I needed. A reason? A home. They took a taxi to the FBI field office, a nondescript building downtown that looked like it had been designed to discourage curiosity. James Morrison was waiting outside in a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's car, looking like exactly the kind of lawyer who could make federal agents nervous. Ready? He asked. No, Lena said, but let's do it anyway. The interview took 6 hours. Agent Sarah Chen turned out to be a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of patient intensity that suggested she'd spent years building cases against people who thought they were untouchable. She took them through everything. How Lena had discovered the files, what the documents proved, the timeline of contamination events, the corporate structure that had enabled the crimes. Marcus gave his testimony about Emma, about the timeline of her illness, about the water quality complaints that had been ignored. He provided documentation he'd gathered, medical records, utility bills, news articles about the water treatment facility acquisition. Small pieces that fit into the larger puzzle Catherine and Lena had already assembled. Around 4 p.m., Agent Chen sat back and looked at them with something approaching respect. I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've seen a lot of corporate malfeasance, but this is something else. The scope, the deliberateness, the complete disregard for human life. You've given us enough to build a case that will send people to prison for decades. When? Lena asked. We're moving fast. Federal prosecutor is presenting to a grand jury tomorrow. We'll have indictments by end of week. Richard Castellane, 6 senior executives, and 3 board members to start. More as we dig deeper into who knew what and when. What happens to Meridian? The company will probably survive in some form, but it'll be gutted. New management, new oversight, billions in settlements to victims' families. It'll take years to sort out. But justice, actual justice, that starts now. They left the FBI building as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost inappropriate given the circumstances. The world should have looked different, Marcus thought. Darker, maybe. More ominous. But it was just a normal evening in a city going about its normal business, oblivious to the fact that a corporate empire had just been sentenced to death. James walked them to a taxi and handed Marcus an envelope. Everything's arranged. I've secured temporary protective custody for you and Sophie through social services. You'll have a safe house for the next 2 weeks, security detail, everything you need. Meridian can't touch you. What about after 2 weeks? By then, the indictments will be public, and you'll be official witnesses in a federal case. Threatening you becomes threatening federal witnesses, which is a whole different level of stupid that even Meridian's lawyers won't risk. Marcus opened the envelope and found keys, an address, and a note that said simply, "You're safe now." He wasn't sure he believed it, but he wanted to. They went to pick up Sophie from Mrs. Chen's apartment, and his daughter ran to him with the kind of hug that made his ribs ache in the best way possible. "Daddy, I saw you on TV. Mrs. Chen said you're a hero." "I'm not a hero, baby. I just did what was right." "That's what heroes do, dummy." Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and an expression that was equal parts approval and concern. "You take care of yourself, Marcus Hale. And that girl, too. What you two did standing up like that, it matters. Thank you. For everything." "Nothing to thank me for. We take care of our own around here." The safe house turned out to be a small apartment in a suburban neighborhood that looked aggressively normal. Well-maintained lawns, minivans in driveways, basketball hoops over garage doors. The security detail was 2 agents who looked bored but competent, stationed in an unmarked car outside. Sophie explored the apartment with the enthusiasm of a child for whom everything was still an adventure, declaring the bathroom fancy because it had a bathtub and the kitchen huge because it had more than 2 feet of counter space. Lena sat on the couch and watched Sophie with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "She's resilient," Lena said. "She's had to be." She shouldn't have had to be. She should have gotten to be a kid without worrying about whether her father's coming home or whether bad men are at the door. Yeah, but life doesn't care what should happen. It just happens. That night, after Sophie was asleep in one of the bedrooms and the security detail had checked the perimeter for the 3rd time, Marcus and Lena sat in the kitchen drinking tea and not talking about everything that had happened. Finally, Lena broke the silence. "What do you think happens now? After the trials, after the convictions, after all of it?" "I don't know. We rebuild, I guess, figure out what comes next." "Do you ever get to stop being the person whose wife was murdered by a corporation? Do I ever get to stop being the daughter who destroyed her father's empire?" Marcus thought about it. "I don't think we get to stop being those things. But maybe we get to be other things too. I'm also Sophie's dad. You're also the person who saved lives by telling the truth. We contain multitudes." She smiled, tired but real. "Poetry?" "Sophie's teacher says it in class. I heard her repeating it." "Smart teacher." "Smart kid." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. 2 people who'd been through war together and somehow made it to the other side. Marcus's phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline read, "Richard Castellane surrenders to federal authorities, faces 43 counts of negligent homicide." There was a photo of him in handcuffs being led into the courthouse, his expensive suit looking slightly rumpled, his expression carefully neutral. But his eyes, Marcus thought, his eyes looked like a man who just realized that money and power couldn't save him from the consequences of his choices. "It's over," Lena whispered. "The beginning part is over," Marcus corrected. "The trials, the testimonies, the rebuilding, that's all still ahead. But this part, the part where he was untouchable? Yeah, that's done." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat there in a safe house kitchen, watching the news coverage of an empire falling, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus let himself believe that maybe justice was real after all. Outside, the security detail changed shifts. Sophie slept peacefully in a room that was protected by federal agents. And somewhere in a detention cell, Richard Castellane was learning what it felt like to be powerless. The world hadn't changed overnight. Corporate greed still existed. People still suffered. Justice was still imperfect and slow. But 43 families would get answers. Hundreds of victims would get compensation. And one man who thought he could poison people with impunity was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And sometimes, Marcus thought as he watched Lena finally relax for the first time in months, sometimes something was enough. The trial of Richard Castellane began on a cold morning in November, 6 months after the story broke. Marcus sat in the courtroom gallery with Sophie on one side and Lena on the other, watching as the man who'd ordered his wife's death was led to the defendant's table in a suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. Richard looked thinner than his photos, older somehow, but his posture was still ramrod straight, a man who refused to bow even as the weight of justice pressed down on him. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Catherine Cross's article had been just the beginning. In the months since, federal investigators had uncovered layers of corruption that went deeper than even Lena had known. Shell companies, offshore accounts, a network of bribery and intimidation that stretched across 3 continents. The evidence filled dozens of boxes and took 3 weeks just to present to the jury. Lena testified on day 12. Marcus watched her walk to the witness stand in a simple gray suit, her hair pulled back, her hand steady as she placed one on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. She looked at her father exactly once, a brief glance that contained everything words couldn't express, and then she focused on the prosecutor and began to speak. She told them everything. How she'd discovered the files, how she'd spent months verifying what she'd found because she couldn't believe her own father was capable of such things, how she'd finally accepted the truth and made the hardest choice of her life. "I loved my father," she said, and her voice cracked but held. "Part of me still does. But 43 people are dead because of decisions he made. Hundreds more suffered, and no amount of love can justify looking away from that." Richard's lawyer tried to break her on cross-examination, suggesting she was motivated by greed or revenge or mental instability. But Lena had been preparing for this moment for months, and she met every attack with quiet dignity. "I had everything," she told the jury. "Money, security, a family name that opened doors. I gave all of that up because some things matter more than comfort. Justice matters more. Truth matters more. Those 43 people mattered more." When she stepped down from the witness stand, she walked past her father's table without looking at him. But Marcus, watching carefully, saw Richard's hands clench into fists, saw the muscle working in his jaw. Rage, maybe. Or grief. Or the terrible realization that his daughter had become the instrument of his destruction. Marcus testified on day 15. He told the jury about Emma, about her laugh, her kindness, the way she'd made their shabby apartment feel like a palace because she was in it. He told them about watching her fade, about the headaches that became seizures, about the hospital bills that had consumed their savings and still hadn't been enough to save her. "I thought it was just bad luck," he said. "Just the universe being cruel for no reason. Finding out that someone had made a deliberate choice to poison her, that her death was a line item in a cost-benefit analysis." He paused, gathering himself. "I don't have words for what that feels like. Knowing that the person you loved most in the world died because someone decided their profit margin was more important than her life." The defense attorney tried to suggest that Emma's death couldn't be definitively linked to the contaminated water. That correlation wasn't causation. But the prosecution had chemical analyses, medical records, epidemiological studies showing cancer clusters in every city Meridian had contaminated. The connection wasn't just probable, it was certain. When Marcus left the stand, he felt lighter somehow, like he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. Emma's death would never make sense, would never be okay. But at least now there was accountability. At least now her death meant something beyond just grief. The trial lasted 7 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days. And on a Tuesday afternoon that felt simultaneously ordinary and momentous, they returned with a verdict. Guilty. On all counts. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered. Some wept. Marcus just sat there holding Sophie's hand and watching Richard Castellane's face as the verdict was read. For the first time since the trial began, the mask of composure cracked. Richard closed his eyes and his shoulders sagged, and for just a moment he looked like what he was. A 70-year-old man who'd gambled everything on the belief that money could buy immunity from consequences and lost. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd presided over the trial with steely impartiality, looked at Richard with something approaching disgust. "You were given power, wealth, and opportunity," she said. "You could have used those gifts to improve lives, to build something meaningful, to contribute to society. Instead, you used them to poison innocent people for profit. You prioritize quarterly earnings over human lives. You treated other people's children, other people's spouses, as acceptable losses in pursuit of wealth you didn't even need. She sentenced him to 43 consecutive life sentences, one for each person killed by the contamination. Even accounting for his age and the possibility of parole, Richard Castellane would die in prison. The empire he'd built was gone. The legacy he'd wanted to leave his daughter was ashes. Marcus felt Sophie squeeze his hand. "Is it over now, Daddy?" "Yeah, baby, it's over." But endings, he was learning, were also beginnings. The 6 senior executives who'd helped implement the contamination scheme were sentenced to terms ranging from 15 to 30 years. The board members who'd known and approved received lighter sentences, but would spend the rest of their lives labeled as accomplices to mass murder. Meridian Holdings declared bankruptcy, its assets liquidated to pay settlements to victims' families. Each family received compensation, not enough to replace what they'd lost because nothing could do that, but enough to acknowledge that their loved ones' lives had value. Emma's settlement, when it finally came through 8 months after the verdict, was substantial enough that Marcus could pay off every debt, put money aside for Sophie's college, and still have enough left over to breathe for the first time in years. He took Sophie to visit Emma's grave on the anniversary of her death, bringing flowers and the settlement check. "We won, Em," he told the headstone. "It took 2 years and it cost everything, but we won. He's in prison. They all are. And Sophie's safe. She's going to be okay." Sophie placed her own flowers on the grave, daisies because Emma had loved them, and stood there for a long moment with her small hand on the cold marble. "I miss you, Mommy," she said quietly. "But Daddy says you'd be proud of us for being brave." "I hope that's true." Marcus pulled his daughter close and let himself cry, really cry, for the first time since the verdict. Not tears of grief alone, but tears of release, of closure, of the particular pain that comes with setting down something you've carried so long it's become part of you. "She is proud," he said. "I promise you, baby. She's so proud." Lena had spent the trial living in the safe house, under protection and largely isolated from the media circus surrounding the case. Her testimony had made her a controversial figure. Half the country saw her as a hero, the other half as a traitor. Death threats came regularly enough that the FBI had recommended she maintain protective custody until things calmed down. But after the sentencing, after her father had been led away in chains to begin a prison term that would outlast his life, she'd asked to see Marcus. They met in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse, sitting at a corner table while security agents tried to look inconspicuous by the door. She looked different, older maybe, more settled into herself. "I'm leaving," she said without preamble. "The lawyer says I can relocate, change my name, start over somewhere where people don't recognize me. There's a settlement from the company, not much after the lawyers and the victims' funds, but enough to live on for a while. I could go anywhere, be anyone." Marcus felt something heavy settle in his chest. "Where are you thinking?" "I don't know, somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can just exist without being Richard Castellane's daughter or the whistleblower or any of it. Just Lena, whoever that is. You'll figure it out." "Maybe." She stared into her coffee like it might contain answers. "Or maybe I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I did the right thing, if destroying my father was justice or just revenge dressed up in noble language." "You saved lives," Marcus said firmly. "The investigation forced every company in the country to review their waste disposal practices. New regulations were passed. Oversight was increased. Because of what you did, the next Richard Castellane will have a harder time poisoning people for profit. That doesn't bring back the 43 people who died." "No, but it might save the 43 who would have died next. That counts for something." Lena looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and somehow still held hope. "I wish I'd met you under different circumstances, like at a party or a coffee shop or somewhere normal." "Yeah, but we didn't. We met in a crisis and we survived it together. That's its own kind of special." "Will you stay in touch? After I leave?" Marcus thought about it, about how much easier it would be to let her walk away, to close that chapter of his life completely. But he thought about Sophie asking where Lena went, about the pancakes and homework help, and the quiet moments when they'd been something close to a family. "Yeah," he said, "we'll stay in touch." She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since the trial began. "Good. Because I'm not great at letting people go once they've become important to me. They finished their coffee and parted ways on the sidewalk outside. Lena headed toward the car that would take her to whatever new life she was building. Marcus watched her go and felt the particular bittersweetness that comes with watching someone you care about choose their own path, even when that path leads away from you. But 3 days later, she called. "I've been thinking," she said without greeting, "about starting over, about building a new life, and I realized something." "What's that?" "I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to hide or change my name or pretend to be someone I'm not. I want to live somewhere that feels like home, with people who feel like family." Marcus's heart started beating faster. "Lena, I found a job, teaching assistant at the community college. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work and it's something I'm good at. And I found an apartment. It's small and the neighborhood's not great, but it's mine. And it's 3 blocks from your place. You're staying. If that's okay with you and with Sophie, I know I'm not family, not really, but you are family," Marcus interrupted. "You've been family since you made pancakes and helped with homework and stood between us and people who wanted to hurt us. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. And we choose you." He heard her breath catch, heard the tears in her voice when she spoke. "Okay. Okay then. I'll see you soon?" "Sunday, dinner. Sophie's been asking when you're coming back. Tell her soon. Tell her I'm coming home." The apartment felt different with 3 people in it again. Fuller. Warmer. More like the home it had been when Emma was alive, but different too. Not a replacement, but an evolution. Lena had her own space now, her own job, her own life, but she was part of their routine again. Sunday dinners became a tradition. Homework help, movies on the couch, the small domestic rituals that turn a house into a home and strangers into chosen family. Sophie adapted with the easy grace of childhood. She called Lena, but introduced her to friends as my almost sister, and seemed perfectly content with the ambiguous definition. Kids understood better than adults sometimes that family came in all shapes, that love didn't follow neat categories. One evening, about a year after the trial ended, Marcus was washing dishes while Lena helped Sophie with a science project at the kitchen table. He watched them argue cheerfully about whether volcanoes counted as a natural disaster or a geological feature, watched Sophie laugh at something Lena said, and felt something settle in his chest. This was it. This was the life they'd fought for. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and honest and built on the foundation of people who'd chosen each other deliberately. Sophie went to bed around 9, and Marcus and Lena sat on the couch with tea, the same way they'd sat in the safe house kitchen all those months ago. "I got a letter today," Lena said, "from one of the victims' families. The woman whose son died, she said she wanted to thank me." "That's good, isn't it?" She said her son's death had meaning now. That knowing why it happened, knowing someone was being held accountable, gave her closure. And I didn't know what to say to that. Because her son is still dead. Justice doesn't bring him back. No, but it acknowledges his life mattered, that his death wasn't random or meaningless. Sometimes that's all we get. Lena nodded, processing. "Do you think Emma would have approved of me living here, being part of your lives?" Marcus thought about his wife, about her kindness and her fierce sense of justice, and the way she'd always made room for people who needed family. "Yeah, she would have loved you. She would have appreciated what you did, the courage it took, and she would have loved that you make Sophie laugh." "I love her too, Sophie, I love both of you. I know that's probably weird or complicated or—" "It's not weird," Marcus said gently. "It's just true. And truth is what we built this whole thing on. No reason to stop now." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city through the window, and Marcus thought about how far they'd come. From strangers sharing an apartment out of desperation to something that looked remarkably like a family. It hadn't been the path he'd expected, but it was the path he'd walked, and it had led somewhere worth being. 2 years after the trial, Marcus got a call from James Morrison. The lawyer's voice was warm with satisfaction. "Thought you'd want to know. The last of the executives just lost his final appeal. Everyone involved in the contamination scheme is officially in prison with no legal recourse left. It's done. It's really done. Thank you for everything. Thank you for having the courage to stand up, Most people wouldn't have. You changed the world, Marcus. You and Lena. That matters. After he hung up, Marcus sat on the couch for a long time, processing. It was done. The fight that had consumed 2 years of his life, that had cost him safety and security and peace of mind, was finally completely finished. Sophie came home from school and found him sitting there. She was 9 now, taller, with Emma's eyes and a confidence that came from knowing she was loved unconditionally. You okay, Daddy? Yeah, baby, just thinking. About Mommy? About everything. About how we got here. Sophie climbed onto the couch next to him, settling in with the easy affection of a child who'd never doubted her place in the world. Mrs. Patterson said in class that sometimes bad things happen so good things can happen later. Like if bad things didn't happen, we wouldn't know to appreciate the good things. Your teacher's pretty smart. I think she's wrong, though. Sophie's expression turned serious, the way it did when she was working through complicated thoughts. I think bad things just happen sometimes, and we get to choose what we do about them, like you and Lena chose to be brave instead of scared. That's what made the good things happen, not the bad things. Marcus pulled his daughter close and kissed the top of her head, overwhelmed by how much wisdom could fit into such a small person. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't always notice because you're busy being a grown-up. Fair point. Lena came home from work an hour later, arms full of groceries and stories about her students. She'd found her calling in teaching, helping community college students navigate subjects that had once seemed impossible. She was good at it, patient, clear, willing to explain things 17 different ways until they made sense. They made dinner together, the three of them moving around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. Sophie set the table. Lena chopped vegetables. Marcus managed the stove and tried not to burn anything. It was ordinary and domestic and perfect in its imperfection. Over pasta and salad, Sophie announced that her class was doing a project about heroes. We have to pick someone who made the world better and write about them. I'm going to write about you and Lena. Lena nearly choked on her water. Sophie, we're not heroes. Yes, you are. You stopped bad people from hurting more people. That's what heroes do. Heroes are supposed to be, I don't know, stronger, braver, not just regular people who got scared and did things anyway. That's exactly what heroes are, Sophie said with the certainty of someone who'd clearly given this considerable thought. The books say heroes are people who do the right thing even when it's hard. You did that, so you're heroes. Marcus looked at Lena across the table and saw his own emotions reflected in her face. Embarrassment and pride and the particular kind of humility that comes with being seen more generously than you see yourself. Okay, Lena said softly. If that's what you want to write about, we'll help you with the research. I don't need research. I was there. And that, Marcus thought, was perhaps the most profound thing his daughter had ever said. She'd been there. She'd witnessed the fear and the courage, and the choice to stand up when staying silent would have been safer. She'd learned firsthand that ordinary people could do extraordinary things if they loved someone enough to try. That night, after Sophie was asleep and the dishes were done, Marcus found Lena on the fire escape looking at the stars. It was their spot, the place they went when the apartment felt too small or the world felt too heavy. You okay? He asked, stepping out to join her. Just thinking about paths not taken, about who I'd be if I'd never found those files. If I'd just stayed ignorant and comfortable and complicit. You can't think like that. That's not who you are. Isn't it? I spent 23 years being Richard Castellane's daughter, living on money made from people's suffering. If I'd been a little less curious, a little more willing to look away. But you weren't. You were exactly curious enough and exactly unwilling enough to look away. And that's what made the difference. Lena turned to face him, and the city lights reflected in her eyes. Do you ever regret it? Taking me in? Everything that happened because of it? Marcus thought about the question seriously, about the fear and the danger and the night spent wondering if they'd survive what they'd started. About Emma's death finally having meaning. About Sophie learning that justice was real and courage mattered. About the small apartment that had become home to 3 people who'd chosen each other against all odds. No, he said, I don't regret it. Not any of it. Even though it cost you everything? It didn't cost me everything. It cost me safety and security and ignorance. But it gave me something better. It gave me the truth, and it gave me you." She looked at him for a long moment, and something passed between them that was too complicated for words. Not quite romance. They'd been through too much together for it to be that simple, but something deeper. A bond forged in fire and sealed in shared purpose. "I'm glad I found your listing," she said. "Out of all the apartments in the city, I'm glad it was yours." "Me too." They stood together on the fire escape, looking out at a city that had no idea 3 people in a shabby apartment had once changed its future, and felt the particular peace that comes from knowing you've done the hardest thing you'll ever do and somehow survived it. Inside, Sophie slept safely in her bed, dreaming whatever dreams 9-year-olds dreamed. Tomorrow she'd wake up and eat breakfast and go to school and come home to a family that loved her unconditionally. She'd grow up knowing her mother's death hadn't been meaningless, that justice existed, that ordinary people could fight dragons and win. That was the real victory, Marcus thought. Not the trial or the verdict or the prison sentences, but this. A child sleeping peacefully, knowing she was safe and loved, and that the world, for all its cruelty, could still be made better by people who chose to be brave. Lena went inside first, murmuring something about grading papers. Marcus stayed on the fire escape a while longer, watching the stars and thinking about Emma. About how she would have loved this ending, imperfect and complicated, but full of hope and chosen family, and the knowledge that her death had sparked a change that saved countless lives. "We did it, Em," he whispered to the night sky. "We got justice. We protected Sophie. We built something good from something terrible. I hope that's enough. I hope wherever you are, that's enough." The stars didn't answer, but he didn't need them to. He could feel Emma in the breeze, in the quiet of the night, in the peace that had finally settled in his chest after years of grief and rage. She would have told him to keep going, to keep building, to keep loving the people who needed family. So that's what he'd do. Marcus went back inside to find Lena at the kitchen table surrounded by student papers, her reading glasses perched on her nose, completely absorbed in someone's essay about cellular biology. She looked up when he entered and smiled, and it was such a normal moment, such a beautifully ordinary moment, that he wanted to hold it forever. "Coffee?" he offered. "Please." He made coffee the way she liked it, with too much sugar and a splash of milk, and they sat together in companionable silence while she graded and he read the news on his phone. Outside, the city hummed with life. People were living their lives, drinking water they trusted to be safe, never knowing how close they'd come to being victims of someone else's greed. But they were safe now. Because a CEO's daughter had chosen truth over family loyalty. Because a grieving father had chosen justice over silence. Because 2 strangers had become allies, then friends, then something that transcended easy definition. The room Marcus had rented out of desperation had become the foundation of something neither of them had expected, a home built not on blood or obligation, but on shared purpose and mutual respect, and the particular love that grows between people who've survived terrible things together. It wasn't the family Marcus had planned, it wasn't the life Lena had expected, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was enough. Sophie emerged from her bedroom around 10, rubbing her eyes and clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Can't sleep." "Come here, baby." She climbed into Marcus's lap, too big for it really, but still his little girl, and looked at Lena across the table. "Lena, can you stay forever?" Lena's expression softened into something that looked like joy and heartbreak combined. "Yeah, sweetheart. I can stay forever." "Good, because you make the best pancakes and daddies are weird." "Hey," Marcus protested, but he was smiling. They sat there together, a man, a woman, and a child who'd found each other in the wreckage of corporate greed and built something beautiful from the ruins. 3 people who'd learned that family wasn't about blood or biology or perfect circumstances. It was about choosing each other, day after day, and deciding that together was better than alone. The apartment was small, the neighborhood was questionable, the future was uncertain, but they had each other, and they had the truth, and they had the knowledge that they'd stood up to power and won. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.